If you'd asked me that morning whether I was making the right choice, I would have smiled and said yes. After all, that's what everyone expected of me. Family, friends, even myself. The church was filled with sunlight streaming through stained glass, the air carrying the faint scent of lilies. My father beamed as he walked me down the aisle, and I tried to match his smile. James looked perfect in his suit, tall, composed, confident. Everything about him screamed stability and success. We'd met through work, fallen into a comfortable rhythm, and when he proposed, I'd said yes because, well, it made sense. But as I reached the altar, my heart felt strangely heavy, like it knew something I didn't want to admit. Married life began smoothly. We bought a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood in Portland, decorated it in neutral tones, and hosted polite dinner parties for James's colleagues. He worked long hours at his law firm, often coming home late with his tie loosened and his mind still on cases. I worked as a graphic designer from home, which meant I spent a lot of time alone. At first, I told myself this was normal. We were building a life together. But weeks turned into months, and I realized I didn't feel like we were partners, more like two people living parallel lives. It wasn't about fights. We rarely argued. It was about the silence, the lack of curiosity about each other's worlds. One evening, I showed James a new branding project I'd been working on for a local coffee shop. "It's nice," he said absently, eyes on his phone. That was it. No questions, no real engagement. I brushed it off, but the truth was harder to ignore. I felt invisible. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. I ducked into a small bookstore downtown to escape the drizzle. As I browsed the travel section, a voice beside me said, "Planning a trip or just daydreaming?" I looked up to see a man about my age, with a camera slung around his neck and a warm smile. "Daydreaming," I admitted. "Some days it feels like the only adventure I get." He introduced himself as Ethan Cole, a freelance travel photographer. We ended up talking for nearly an hour about favorite cities, hidden trails, and the stories photos can tell. When I finally left, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: awake. Over the next few weeks, I ran into Ethan a few more times. Once at a local cafe, once at the farmer's market. Each time, our conversations flowed easily. One Saturday, he mentioned a community art show he was helping organize. "You should come," he said. "I think you'd love it." I almost said no. James had mentioned a work dinner that night, and I usually stayed home for those. But something in me wanted to go. That night, surrounded by paintings, photographs, and music, I realized how much I'd miss feeling part of something vibrant. It wasn't about romance, at least not then. It was about being seen. Ethan asked about my design work, not out of politeness, but with genuine interest. He introduced me to artists and photographers who spoke about their work with passion. I went home feeling both inspired and unsettled. Inspired because I'd remembered what lit me up. Unsettled because I knew James had never looked at me that way. Like my dreams mattered. Weeks turned into months. My world with James stayed the same, polite, efficient, quiet. My world outside of him grew more colorful, filled with creative projects and new connections. One night, after James came home late again, I asked him if he wanted to go hiking that weekend. "Maybe," he said without looking up from his laptop. "If I'm not too busy." I realized then that I'd been waiting for him to choose me, and he never would. It wasn't about Ethan, though he'd reminded me of what it felt like to be alive. It was about me. I told James over dinner one night, "I don't think this marriage is working," I said quietly. He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "I wondered when you'd say it." We agreed to separate without drama. There were no accusations, no shouting, just the quiet acknowledgement that we wanted different lives. I moved into a small apartment closer to downtown. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. I painted the walls bright colors, filled the space with plants, and set up a proper studio for my design work. Ethan and I stayed friends. Sometimes we'd meet for coffee or go to local events, but I made sure my new life wasn't about jumping from one relationship to another. It was about building a life I wanted, on my own terms. A year later, my design business had grown. I'd traveled to 2 new cities, hiked trails I'd once only read about, and filled my days with people and projects that mattered to me. Ethan was still in my life, sometimes as a collaborator, sometimes as more, But the real change was inside me. I'd learned that marrying the wrong person wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of choosing myself. Looking back, I don't regret marrying James. That chapter taught me what I needed to know. That a life built on comfort alone will never be enough. Now I wake up each day knowing I'm living the life I fought for, and that's worth everything.